Let's close the eyes and put our attention on the silence that always exists deep in the mind. Connecting with that silence, we become the silence. From that level of silence, we witness the reading of the Yoga Vasishta. It's book 3, chapter 114, continuing with 53. Your wishes burst out in expressions. Such as, these are my sons, and these are my treasures. I am such a one, and these things are mine. All this is the effect of a magic spell of ignorance that binds you tightly. Your body is a void in which your desires have produced all your selfish thoughts, like empty winds, raising waves on the surface of the sea. Learn, you who are seekers of truth, that the words I and mine and this and that are all meaningless in their true sense. There is nothing that may be called real at any time except knowledge of the true self and essence of Brahman. The heavens above and the earth below, with all the ranges of hills and mountains on earth, and all the lines of its rivers and lakes, are only the dissolving sights seen in the same or different lights as they are represented by our ignorance. Phenomena rise to view from ignorance and disappear before the light of knowledge. They appear in various forms in the substratum of the soul, just as the fallacy of a snake appears in the substance of a rope. Rama, know that only the ignorant are liable to the error of taking the earth, sun, and stars for realities. Not so the learned, to whom the great Brahman is present in all his majesty and full glory in all places and things. While the ignorant labor under the doubt of two ideas, a rope and a snake in the rope, the learned are firm in their belief and sight of one true God in all things. Therefore, do not think like the ignorant, but well consider all things like the wise and the learned. Forsake your earthly wishes and do not grope like the vulgar by believing the not self to be the self. Of what good is this dull and dumb body to you, Ram, in your future state, that you are so overcome by alternating joy and grief at its pleasure and pain? Like the wood of a tree, its gum resin and its fruit and seed are not one and the same thing, though they are so closely related to one another. So this body and the embodied being are quite separate from one another, though they are so closely united with each other. As the burning of a pair of bellows does not blow out the fire or stop the air blown by the other pair, so the vital air is not destroyed by destruction of the body, but finds its way into another form and frame elsewhere. The thought that I am happy or miserable is as false as the idea of water in a mirage. Knowing it as such, give up your misconceptions of pleasure and pain and place your reliance upon the soul truth. Oh, how wonderful it is that men have so utterly forgotten the true Brahman and have placed their reliance on false ignorance, the sole cause of errors. Do not, O Ram, give way to ignorance in your mind, which, being overspread by its darkness, will render it difficult for you to pass over the errors of the world. Know ignorance to be a false fiend and deluder of the strongest minds. It imagines hellfire in the cooling beams of the watery orb of the moon. Ignorance conceives the torments of infernal fires proceeding from the refreshing beams of that celestial light. It views a dry desert in wide waters, rolling with waves and undulating with the fragrance of the aqueous kalpa flowers. It imagines a dry mirage in the empty clouds of autumn. Ignorance builds imaginary castles in empty air and causes the error of rising and falling towers in clouds. It is the delusion of our fancy, that makes us feel the emotions of pleasure and pain in our dreams. If the mind is not filled and led away by worldly desires, then there is no fear of falling into the dangers that the daydreams of our earthly affairs constantly present before us. The more our false knowledge lays hold of our minds, the more we feel the torments of hell and its punishments in us, like nightmares in sleep. The mind, pierced by error, as if by the thorny stalk of a lotus, sees the whole world revolving before it like the sea rolling with its waves. Ignorance takes possession of the mind, converts enthroned princes to peasants, and reduces them to a condition worse than that of beastly hunters. Therefore, Ram, give up the earthly desires that serve at best to bind down the soul to this mortal earth and its mortifying cares. Remain like the pure white crystal, reflecting the colors of all things around in your stainless mind. Employ your mind to duties without being tarnished by your attachment to any. Remain like the unsullied crystal, receiving reflections of outward objects without being stained by any. Knowing everything with eagerness in your watchful mind and performing all your duties with due submission and staying away from the common track with your exalted mind, you will raise yourself above comparison with any other person. Chapter 115, Causes of Happiness and Misery. Valmiki relates, thus being encouraged by the high-minded Vasishta, Ram's lotus eyes became opened like new-blown flowers. He shone forth with a pure grace. His heart expanded and his face, blooming like the fresh lotus, reviving at the end of night under the vivifying beams of the rising sun. His smiling face shone like the moon with inward enlightenment and wonder. Then, with the nectar beams of his bright and pearly white tea, Ram spoke out these words. Ram said, "What a wonder that the lack of ignorance should subdue all things, as if it could tie down huge hills with the thread of lotus stalks. Oh, that this straw of the earth, which shows itself to be so dense in a body in the world, is no more than the production of our ignorance, which shows the unreal as a reality. Tell me more for my enlightenment regarding the true nature of this magical earth, which rolls like a ceaseless stream running amidst the ethereal worlds. There is another great question that worries my heart. What happened to the fortunate Lavana in the end? Also, tell me more about the embodied soul and the animated body, whether they are in concord or discord with one another, and which of them is the active agent and recipient of the rewards or acts in this earth. Tell me also, who was that sorcerer and where he fled after putting the good king Lavana to all his tribulation, and then restoring him to his former exalted position. Vasishtha said, the body is like a frame of woodwork that contains nothing. It receives the reflection of an intelligence as in a dream, and this is called the mind. The mind becomes the living principle, life, and also has the power of thinking. It is as unstable as a boat on the current of world of affairs, and it plays the part of a fickle monkey amidst the busy castle of the world. The active principle in the body is known under various names: the mind, life, and ego. And having a body for its home, it is employed in a variety of actions. The active principle is subject to endless pains and pleasures in its unenlightened or unawakened state. And the body has no relation with them. Unenlightened understanding also has received many fictitious names according to the various faculties that it exhibits in its acts. As long as an unawakened mind is in its sleeping state, it perceives the busy bustle of the world as in a dream, which is unknown to the waking or enlightened mind. As long as a living being is not awakened from its sleep, it has no labor. It has to labor under the inseparable mist of worldly errors. But the darkness hanging over the minds of the enlightened is put to flight as quickly as the shade of night spreading over the bed of lotuses is dispersed at sunrise. That which the learned call the heart, the mind, the individual soul, ignorance, desire, and the principle of action is the embodied being that is subject to the feelings of both pleasure and pain. The body is dull matter, unconscious of pain and pleasure. Men of right reason say that the embodied being is subject to pain and pleasure because of its stubborn ignorance and irrationality. The embodied being is the cause of its own misery. The individual soul is the subject of its good and bad actions. It becomes confined in its body because of its irrationality and remains trapped there like a silkworm in its cocoon. The mind, being tied to its ignorance, exerts its faculties in various ways and turns round like a wheel in its various pursuits and enjoyments. The mind, dwelling in the body, makes it rise and sit, eat and drink, walk and go, hurt and kill, all of which are acts of the mind and not of the body. As the master of the house does his many acts in it, and not the whole house itself, so the mind acts its different parts in the body and not the body by itself. The mind is the active and passive agent of all actions and passions, and of the pains and pleasures of the body. It is only the mind that makes the man. So what Vasishtha is telling us here is that the mind exists only as a collection of individual karmic traces, and as a collection of divine karmic traces. When the individual karmic traces dominate, the individual acts in ways that will not be in accord with the divine karmic traces. This is how individual karmic traces are created in the first place. When individual karmic traces are balanced, then the mind continues to function, but on the basis of divine karmic traces. In that case, all actions are spontaneously in accord with the divine karmic traces, which are the laws of nature or the will of God. But when even the divine karmic traces are balanced, then the mind ceases to exist. And there is only pure consciousness, the silent witness. Let's continue with our eyes closed and the attention on the silent witness, becoming that silent witness. You are the silent witness. Watch the conscious thinking mind. Start the mantra. Let it go. Follow the mantra as it goes deep into the koshas, touching individual karmic traces, balancing them. Jai Gurudev. Thank you all for attending.